So thrilled to be included in today's OKR session alongside Eric here. Eric is the founder and managing partner of an organization called Sagatica, which is an excellent coaching group that's done a lot of positive work alongside Dr. Bronner's. I've learned so much about conscious leadership and team management and OKRs from Eric over the years. He is has an unrelenting commitment to results and an unyielding commitment to spirit, and that really comes through in his deep, soulful, yet effective work with businesses. I highly recommend that you check out his books, Leadership Breakdown and Four Virtues of a Leader. And today he's going to be speaking with us about how OKRs are really a powerful goal setting framework for translating our strategy and how our strategy aligns with Purpose Pledge into clearly articulated goals that support leadership teams align and act as a communication framework to our teams on the ground that are doing the work to support our strategy as we work our 3-year plans within the Purpose Pledge to meet our commitments over the next 9 years. So this framework was very intentionally selected, again, to translate that strategy into aligned goals that help our teams act in their day-to-day. So without further ado, I'll hand things over to Eric and he'll walk us through the nuts and bolts of this powerful framework.
Beautiful. Thank you, Asta. Thank you,
And
Alyssa.
Eric, that folks are welcome to enter questions in the chat as we go. Eric is going to wait and answer them until we get to Q&A. But as they occur to you, you are welcome to pop them in the chat. And Asta and I will be watching for those so we can bring them into our conversation when we get to that point. Thank you, Eric.
Fabulous. Thank you. So delightful to be with you all here in the midst of your day. And as Asta was mentioning, I work with executives and executive teams, helping to be sort of bring more consciousness into the way that they're sort of planning, executing, building culture. And as Asta said, I'm also the guy that brought the OKRs to Dr. Bronner's back in 2019. And this work internally that Les and Asta and the crew on the ground is doing is a remarkable expansion of the OKRs. And I'm going to talk about OKRs, given we have, the time we have and the constraints that we have. That's what I want to talk about. I'm also want to give you something sort of underneath the framework of the OKRs that makes the framework actually work in what I sort of lovingly come to call conscious execution, right? Now, I know that could sound like an oxymoron in some ways, but I mean that in a way that hopefully will come to life here as we go forward. So if I may, let's see, share the screen. All right, hopefully you see conscious execution on the screen, yeah?
Looking good.
Okay, perfect, thank you. So the sort of reality that I'm just going to name, as it were, because that's one of the things that we get to do, right? Is that you were asked to implement the OKRs. Hey, welcome to Purpose Pledge, and you didn't necessarily raise your hand and say, "Hey, I think OKRs would be a great thing for us." But there's this notion that, is this tool really the right tool for you? Is this the right thing that to implement in your business? And that is a fair question, right? That's a fair question to be asking, and I'll tell you that the the I've been in rooms, I've been in teams where this is implemented and it becomes sort of a bureaucratic layer, and that sort of drains the team. And the same tool used appropriately actually creates energy, right? So you've got two different options of what happens with it, and I've seen it gone one way, I've seen it go the other way. The difference rarely is the framework of the OKR implementation, what's happening in the human system around the framework. And so that's really what I want to dive into here on the front end, not just the mechanics of the OKR, but why would they fail and how do we get ahead of that? So the see, I'm working at there we go. So before we talk about the OKRs, let me frame the business in the way that I've come to see it over the many years of doing this work, and maybe that'll affect the way you look at business as well. But I essentially have come to recognize that every organization is a system that converts energy into outcomes. Every company, your company, my company, this community is fundamentally a system that takes in energy and converts into something of value, something that the market, whatever the market is, values, right? And um, the businesses that falter, the organizations that falter, usually are not doing it because they had bad intent. It's usually not because there's lazy people. It's usually not that there's something wrong with the way they went to market. And granted, there are bad intent players, there are lazy people, but that's not really what's typically happening. What's typically happening is, you know, how much of the energy is reaching the outcome and how much of the energy is leaking. And so if we think about the system as a whole, it begins with the intent, right? What is the um, what is the will, the innovation, the ingenuity? What is it that you're bringing to the table that starts the engine going? That's what you're bringing in. Your people are bringing it in with their ideas, with their will, with their effort, with their intent. It then goes on to the system. The system is then a collection of people and decisions. There's people, decision making, there are processes, there are systems, there are all the mechanics of the organization, how they work, how they flow through, not the least of which is decisions. And at the end of that, you have the outcomes, right? What actually is the evidence of the work. And that outcome is the results that you're doing, the outcomes that you're doing, and the impact that you're having on the environment around you. So I hope that makes sense, sort of broadly speaking, right? We are a system that turns energy into outcomes, and that system often leaks energy. And it's where this energy leaks that there is room for the OKRs to begin to address those leaks. And the leaks are not usually leaks of effort because people are putting forth the effort as required. There are problems of how aware, how intentional, how conscious, right, are folks being with regards to what they're doing on the day to day. And so these three leaks in terms of the energy, I think of in fairly simple terms, right? I think of the first set of leaks as drift. Drift is essentially people pulling in different directions. And so what you have is you have not lack of care, but not even lack of effort, but it's effort without alignment, right? So effort without alignment is just motion. In the purpose-led organization, one of the ways you align the efforts is with the values, right? With the purpose, why we're here in the first place. And and we don't want people drifting away from the purpose or the mission. So that's one element of it. The other part is that there are decisions that people are making that pushing in different directions. So there are competing interests, competing priorities. If you think of it as people on a boat or in a rowboat rather, um, everybody is rowing at full strength, but each rower has sort of decided to the direction that they want to go in. Right. And so the chief operating officer is saying we need to move in this direction. Your head of finance is saying we need to move in this direction, and you have the organization drifting. So the boat doesn't really stop; it just sort of meanders around, and God forbid it should actually go in circles. Right. So that's the drift component. It's misalignment. The second way that you lose energy in an organization is drag. It's really the uneven execution, uneven synchronization between folks. This is where people are waiting on other people to get things done. This is where decisions that really should take a day take a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks. This is where the rhythms aren't matching up. Teams are operating in a sort of vacuum, not aligned with one another. And if we're back to this rowing boat, this is where the the rowers are pulling in the same direction, but they're hitting the water at a different count and different cadence, right? And so what you have is you have essentially they're not fighting each other, but it's staccato, and so it's creating drag on the organization. And the third element that I want to speak to is friction. So drift is going in different directions, drag is going a different cadence, and synchronization and friction is sort of where energy gets lost through essentially, either direct conflict or it's awkward sister passive aggressive conflict, both of which are leaking energy out of the system. There's turf protection, there's silo identification, there's resentment. I had a situation that I was in with a client just a couple of weeks ago. The CFO and the COO got into a big row. They had some disagreement about how to do something in the organization, and in lockstep, the operations folks and the finance folks following their boss's direction are now not really talking to one another. You can see the problem, right? That's friction in the organization, and you see it happening on a rather regular cadence. If we're in a rowing situation again, then the oars are bumping into each other, or some of the rowers are just stop, their hands on the oar, but they're not rowing. And so drift, drag, and friction are the ways that an organization loses energy. Drift is a vector problem, directionally going, the energy is moving, but not in the same direction. Drag is essentially a timing or a tempo problem. Energy is moving, but arriving out of sync. And then you have friction, which is, I don't know, a heat problem, right? The heat problem saying that energy that should be propelling you is being spent on sort of relational management. So this is the essence of the leakage in the organization. And you don't have to raise your hand and you don't have to say anything, but I would have you sort of contemplate for a moment your team, your organization, your executive team, your immediate operational team, whatever team is considered your team. Where is there drift and where is there drag and where is there friction? Because this is not uncommon. This is what humans do when we get together. We run into these kind of situations. So this is where we lose energy, the drift, drag, and friction. But then what causes that, right? What's underneath that? And we're getting a little more sort of psychological before we get operational here because the two things work in concert. And so, um, you know, Asta might have mentioned this, but I've been doing this work for over 20 years with organizations. I have worked with, hundreds of executive, dozens and dozens of executive team, and there's a pattern that keeps showing up. Uh, these leaks are not bad intent, they're not bad strategy, they're not the wrong tools. They're caused by these three unexamined needs that all us humans tend to have in our pocket, right? In our minds, rather. So the first one is that there's a need to be right. Think about your experience on the team. Somebody has the need to be right. I'm the one who has to be acknowledged. I'm the one who has to have the voice. I'm the one who has to have the the affirmation of my competence. And we all have a need to be right, by the way. I have the need to be right. This is not an accusation. This is just a revelation, right? I'm making clear what is otherwise sometimes hidden. So we have a need to be right. We also have this need to be liked. Human beings have this abiding need to be approved, seen, heard, known, respected, included, be in the in group. One of the great ways to really demoralize an organization is to have an out group and an in group. And so we have a need to be liked, and we have this need to have might. We want to have some control, some power, some autonomy, some authority to affect and effectuate the environment around us. And these three needs are, again, this is not pathology, this is just psychology. This is how humans are set up. What I call this when it's out of order, when it's unexamined, is egomyopia. That's the term that I came up and I put in my book, The Leadership Breakdown. Egomyopia is not seeing and regulating our ego protective strategies in real time. So they end up unexamined and running the show. And so the need to be right will often manifest as I have to be right, therefore you're wrong. This is where drift is being born out of because I want to go my way, even if you go your way. I don't think your way is as good as my way if you follow my drift here. It's literally a drift, right? Equally so with friction, right? I need to be right. You need to be right. We bump into each other. The need to be liked will bring on drag and drift because the need to be liked can absolutely cannibalize decision speed. It can cause people to be more agreeable than they ought to be. It softens accountability. And the need to have might, the need to have control certainly can also bring friction because it is argumentative or passive aggressive, and it can also yield drift. We're moving in different directions because I want to control the situation and I don't want to go the way you're going. So that's some of the um, sort of psychology. And as I said, it's not whether or not we have these needs. You do, I do, we all do. The question is whether they're running you or whether you're running them. Are you conscious of this, right? And we have to answer that before we get into the OKRs. And so the the who is the person running the show is the question at hand. And this is where I come to this notion of conscious leadership, right? And as I put on the slide here, conscious leadership is not a personality type. It's not really a management style. It's a discipline. It's a practice. And it's a practice where primarily we're leading beyond this ego myopia, right? So there's some self-awareness to see where my need to be liked or my need to be right is controlling the costing the team. And in my framework of how we address this ego myopia, there's three human virtues, as it were, human capacities that we cultivate in order to address that. The first is that we cultivate wisdom. Wisdom is our ability to see clearly, to read the room, to read yourself, to understand what's happening both below the surface, what's happening beyond the obvious, what are the details, what are the perspectives. You bring wisdom into your leadership and you bring wisdom into the OKRs, and you are less likely to be caught up in the need to be right because you can see the bigger picture. Rather than being right, you can see what's true and what's necessary. The second sort of dimension of that is love. When I first wrote the book and I was putting this out to some of my colleagues and clients, and they said, well, do you really want to put the word love out there in a book? Aren't you sort of, compromising the message? And I said, no, I'm being very clear about the message. Love is a real dynamic in the human experience. And we're working in an organization where if you have a leader who's got great wisdom, but they don't show love, you're not engaging because you don't engage with ideas, you engage with humans. Ideas bring you into it, humans keep you there, right? And so love really is the genuine care for other people. And it looks like not just a performance review or performance check-in, but your actual interest in other people's development and other people's well-being. And the third element to cultivate is power. And power gets a really weird rap. We get so bent around the axle or wrapped around the axle with regards to power. It is misunderstood, misapplied. And I'm not talking about the power that has the sort of military power or political power. I'm talking about your innate capacity to show up authentically, your capacity as a purpose-driven human in a purpose-driven organization and purpose-pledged community to really bring forth what is authentic and genuine and legitimate for you, and therefore encourage that in others. It's the personal power that actually allows you to empower other people. And the reason I'm sort of bringing this forward is because wisdom is how we begin to address and correct our need to be right. And love is the sort of mature expression of the need to have to be liked. And power is our mature capacity for the need to have might. And so when we have those in hand, right, when we bring these to play, the framework of the OKR that's layered on top of that becomes much more secure and solid because, and those of you who apply that, you can sort of nod internally in your head, right? Where much of the OKR genius gets cannibalized is with these ego myopic needs. So I wanted to put the psychology before we go to the application of it, so that we've established that foundation. So that's who is leading. And then the question that follows that then is, how are we effectuating? How are we actually implementing? How are we pursuing the various notions, the various goals and objectives, the mission, the purpose for our organization? And that's where I get into sort of the conscious conduct. And conscious in this regard for me is it's intentional, it's deliberate, it's purposeful, it's thought out, it has a great awareness about it. It is not accidental and reactive. And this is where the OKRs live, right? This is where you get your shared agreements about how the organization moves towards accomplishing their goals with the intent and the awareness of what it is that we're impacting in the greater perspective, right? That's the notion of the purpose. We're not just doing this, what I love about everyone in this space and what I love about doing this work is, in my own business and being deeply in this realm of purpose-led organizations is that, we're actually taking on a dual effort. The organizations that are not purpose-led have a certain streamlined effort in just saying, screw all of this, let's just get the whole profit and make it as profitable as we can. Once you start layering in things like purpose, like impact, like interconnectedness, once you start layering things like, care, it makes it a little more complicated, doesn't it? But it's worth it, isn't it? And so the OKRs are not intended to be a straight up reporting mechanism, right? It's not the same as your KPIs. They're not a performance management tool. I know us has had these conversations many a time now, right? It's not how you're sort of measuring individual performance. For that, we have performance management tools, right? It is essentially an implementation for conscious conduct for the organization, for the teams, for the individuals to be able to be alert and conscious and aware on how they're implementing what's meaningful to the business. So the OKRs give you a structure to work with together. And in effect, what you have is you have an ability to have a shared direction so that everyone can not only understand what is expected of them, but orient themselves towards it. So you see how we're beginning to address drift in the situation, right? And it is not just the executive team that knows where we're all going, it's the collective, right? It absolutely gives us some kind of a way to measure whether we are going and achieving the right thing, not just measuring the sort of stuff that we're doing, but are we tracking towards what's important, what's necessary, what's meaningful, and what's valuable to all the stakeholders. The other thing that it does is in terms of this idea of a cadence for honest conversations is that, one of the great challenges in organizations is having meaningful, honest, ongoing conversations. And I can't remember who to attribute this to, but there was a quote I read where they said the conversation is the relationship. The conversation is the relationship. I heard that quote and I love it, right? Because we think about what's happening between people. Um, the conversation is the relationship, and the frequency, depth, and meaningful of conversations. I've come to call it conversational deficiency in organizations, which I describe as not having timely conversations about topics that matter. Timely conversations about topics that matter. That is a game changer, and this is what OKRs bring to bear. It literally generates a framework for having timely conversations about topics that matter. You can think about that for your business. Think about that for your relationship. Think about it in a community. Think about it with your children. Think about it in political discourse. How do we have timely conversations about topics that matter? And so the last one is this notion of accountability. I will out myself right here and tell you that the notion of when people say hold people accountable sends shivers up my spine and makes me want to run because holding people accountable is counterproductive to the very idea you're trying to implement. When you're holding people accountable, by definition, they're no longer accountable because you're holding them. And so accountable would suggest that they are able to be accountable for themselves. And when you have a framework that is clear and coherent and consistently updated, accountability is the implication of it. If you're running around holding people accountable, I hope you're following this kind of, epistemological problem we're having here, because to hold someone accountable says that they're not accountable because you're holding them. And so we want to switch from sort of parent-child dynamic into an adult-to-adult dynamic. And this framework is a beautiful way to elevate the conversation from a parent-child to an adult to adult. So this is what, the how of it is, or the value of the OKRs. And let's see. So getting a little bit into the meat of it, and you know, I promise you, you're not going to leave here today going, I'm completely ready to implement. I promise you, will leave here today with hopefully two things. I'm very interested in doing more understanding about this, one, and I have some more clarity about how this works and where we might get in our own way. But this is one of the sort of key features of the distinction here, of what OKRs brings to the world. I have two daughters. They're 2 years apart. They're almost two. They're 22 months apart, to be specific. But um, I had, when you're a consultant and you do this for your whole life, there is no turning it off, right? So this notion of the conversation, this is less about what I do. This is more about who I am. So when my daughters were young, I tried diligently to help them grasp the notion of thinking in terms of outcome and an activity, right? Like, what do you want? Not just what are you going to do? Because, many conversations are, so how you doing? Isn't that how we greet each other? How you doing? So the notion that there are things that we do is implemented so deeply in us, and it's to some degree, because that's how we live, we do stuff, and it's to some degree because we are products of the Industrial Revolution, where activity was sort of the things that we invented. How many times did you crank that wheel? How many items did you put on the conveyor belt? So that's what you do. And I talk about my daughters because I remember they were, I don't know, maybe 6 and 4, and I was trying to convey to my older daughter Tara like how to speak in outcome versus action, and we were sitting in the living room watching TV, and Maya, my younger daughter, was in front of the TV, and Tara couldn't see through her, and she was too young to say, "You're not made out of glass." That was maybe that's old school, but um, for the longest time, Tara would say, "Maya, you're in the way. Maya, you're in the way," which is not really stating what Tara wants. She's not stating an outcome. And then I sat there one day, and Maya was again sort of in front of the TV, and Tara says to Maya, oh, it's all 6 years old, she goes, "Maya, move towards the door." I was like, freaking hallelujah, right? My 6-year-old grasped that you can state an outcome and not just an activity, right? She didn't say, "Maya, you're in the way." She didn't say, she said, "Move towards the door." She gave her a destination and an outcome. Um, let's sort of fast forward this to a much more complicated thing of organizational dynamics, right? But we have to move from, the target, which is what you did, to the change, which is what you actuated, which was what you accomplished. Um, we have a long history of speaking in terms of activity, and we have less of a history in understanding how to speak in terms of outcomes. This is where the OKR lives. And by the way, if we grasp this, if we just got off this call and you didn't get anything else, and you understood that you have to begin to phrase your organizational goals and objectives in terms of outcomes and not in terms of activity, you will have made a significant leap in terms of where you're going with this work. So let me give you some examples, right? In the world of HR, before we get into some of the mechanisms here's like, so this is a familiar HR kind of goals, right? Let's hire 15 seasonal workers. Let's make sure that we do 60 interviews, and our onboarding materials need to be updated to reflect new laws and new regulations and new cultural, changes at the organization. Does this make sense to everyone? We've seen all these, right? Not OKR language. Totally legitimate, because it is describing effort. But what are we actually moving towards? What is the outcome that we want? What is the change that we want to see in what we're doing? And so look at how this is framed. HR, not just hiring and conducting interviews, but improve the 90-day retention of seasonal workers from the baseline of 55 to 80%, or reduce the time to productivity from 3 weeks to 10 days. Can you feel in your body the distinction between the activity and the outcome? We still need the activity. That's not the goal. The activity is a bunch of items that you accomplish in order to get the change that you want to experience. OKRs is not interested at the top level at the activity that you're doing. It's interested in getting the whole organization oriented towards what are the key elements that need to change for us to grow the business, to serve the community, to actuate our vision and mission and purpose. I'll give you 2 more examples so that this can sink in, right? In manufacturing, yes, we want to run 3 lean process workshops. Absolutely, because we want the folks on the ground to understand. We want to, all these SOPs that haven't been documented, 12 of them have to be done. We want to install new, yes, yes, and yes. Normal, typical, useful, necessary, incomplete in terms of a management perspective. We want to reduce production waste from 8% to 4% by the end of Q3. You can feel in your bones the difference that we're making here. We want to increase the line uptime from 82 to 91%. You see the outcomes that are happening here, the impact, the change, the value that's being driven. Sourcing will be another one. I want to audit 20 suppliers, attend 2 trade shows, renegotiate 5 contracts. How many times have you seen lists of goals like these in your organization? Maybe even right now you're looking at them, right? My absolute invitation to you is to think in terms of not activity, but outcome. Increase our certified regenerative suppliers from 30 to 50%. Reduce the source dependencies from 8 to 3. These are the things that are meaningful to the organization. And so I hope you're sort of taking this in, and perhaps you might even have some questions on it. But I'm going to roll through the next few slides and then we'll get to the questions section. So this, though, I'm going to emphasize it one more time. This is key. This is not a behavior change. This is a mindset change. This is a consciousness shift. You have to move from, I'll give you an analog, right? For the longest time, we have hourly paid folks, right? Even the salary is sort of an extrapolation of hourly for the most part until you get to the ridiculous salaries, right? Mark Zuckerberg just hired some kid from AI for $250 million a year. The hell do you justify that, right? But that's not paying for activity, that's paying for outcome, right? And so, you know, the dollar per hour says, I want you in this hour to do certain things. We should really be reflecting on what is it like to pay dollar per outcome, right? We can articulate these are the things that I have to accomplish, and then we'll pay for the outcomes. You can figure out the activity, and oh, by the way, if you can do it in 10 minutes, good on you. If it takes you an hour, whatever it takes. So this is a shift in the way that we sort of approach and think about the world. So now, let me get a little bit into some examples and what it looks like in the sort of real world, if you can call it that, right? The um, okay, objectives, as I say here, are qualitative, objectives are directional. They're intended to be both sort of where are we going and let me feel good about it. So there's an aspirational component to it and there's a directional component to it. And they are qualitative, meaning it's more of a feeling than necessarily a number, right? So it's something that is going to be engaging and something that's going to be compelling and something that makes me want to move towards this and feel engaged in it. The key results then is the tracking that I'm doing. If I accomplish this, this, and this, and I move from here to here, I will get closer to this aspirational, this qualitative, this directional objective. Um, um, I'm losing my buttons. So, for example, and Asta, thank you again. So, Asta, as recently as yesterday, had this sort of, I had written out the objectives and she came back and said, the objectives, are the objectives written so that they're qualitative and directional? Meaning, do they compel and do they direct, right? Do they orient us? And so our workforce reflects our values and grows with us. Can you feel that as an objective? Our workforce reflects our values and grows with us. So there is a qualitative component, right? There's a feeling component. They reflect our values, it grows with us, and it has an orientation. It's growth directed. It doesn't yet tell us what to do or how we measure it. That's where the key results come in. And so, and there would typically be, 5 or 6 key results under them. I'm just using these as examples. Improve 90-day retention of seasonal workers from 55 to 80% by Q3. You see what's happening here, right? It's a measurement from X to Y. It's a measurement of movement, of outcome, not just of activity. Or achieve ENPS. I don't know if you're all familiar with this term ENPS. It's sort of made its rounds recently into our environment. So you know what an NPS score is, a Net Promoter Score that usually is done for sales, for marketing, for customer service. And ENPS is an Employee Net Promoter Score, which has proven to be even a little more interesting than the engagement surveys that many of us are familiar with. Anyway, achieve ENPS of 75 plus across all production by Q4. I'm going to go through a couple of these examples. I think you'll see the spirit of it, right? Our ingredient sourcing regenerates the land and earns supplier trust. There's the objective. We're talking about how we're sourcing and how we're affecting the environment and how we're affecting our supplies and what comes of it. It still doesn't tell us what moves in that direction. That's where the key results come in, right? Increase certifies regenerative supplies from 30 to 50 by end of year. You follow where I'm going. So now we have quantitative, time-limited movement that's typically in a quarter or less, and we can track that. And then there's activities will come under it to effectuate that, right? So I have my ingredient sourcing regenerates the land. Yes. Earn supplier trust. Absolutely. What are we going to do? We're going to increase the certified regenerative supplies And what else are we going to? We're going to reduce single source dependencies from 8 to 3. This is not all that different from what I showed you on this previous slide. Now it's a little more blown out, as it were, right? And then we go to the last one there, the idea of operations. The planet is a stakeholder in our facilities of operation, facilities operations. What a beautiful vision. The planet is a stakeholder. I shared this with Alyssa, I think, in a recent conversation. I was saying what I would love to see in organizations, what I would love to see in any company that is sincere about this implementation of purpose-driven work is that on the board of the company, there's a board seat that I would call the Gaia seat. There's a Gaia seat, and there's somebody, a human, sitting in that seat who has got a board level power and responsibility to represent and hold Gaia as the key stakeholder. And I would go even further to say that on the executive team, there ought to be a chief spiritual officer, somebody who's holding the highest sort of mission and purpose of the organization as their executive responsibility, and that has the same sort of line of influence as the other executives in the organization. The planet is a stakeholder in our facilities operations is the Gaia seat, right? Reduce production waste by, from 8 to 4 by Q3, achieve zero food safety incidents and maintain 91%. You follow where I'm going here. We have these aspirational directions that are meaningful and orienting, and then we have the movement. We haven't in any of these yet talked about specific activity. That comes next. That's living in the next realm of the plans that everybody has to put forth to accomplish the OKRs. So I'm winding towards the bottom here, right? So the OKR system is really well designed to respond to these organizational leaks that I talked about at the very beginning. This is where it all ties together, right? So drift, drag, and friction. So you can kind of see for yourself, right? Drift is actually addressed with radical clarity. And radical clarity is this notion that we have objectives that are written down, that are shared across the organization. So we're taking misalignment out of the equation and creating visibility before it becomes an issue, before it becomes expensive. It shows where the people are rowing in different directions and creating drift unintentionally. Drag is then addressed by this notion of an iterative cadence where we are on a quarterly basis and sitting in as a whole organization on a weekly basis doing the check-ins. And it becomes something where the organization's rhythm and syncopation and clock is now lining up together. And so when this rhythm becomes shared, the execution speeds become synchronized because we can have the work arriving together at the outcome rather than sort of staggered, or we're waiting on one another and we're uncertain which way and where to go. And the last leak of the organization is this notion of friction. And friction is definitely being addressed here with transparency, where everybody can see the same picture. It's harder to sort of fight for your turf or for your territory or for your silo, because in effect, what you're doing is you're optimizing for, and this is, in every organization that I work, we try to bring in this notion of enterprise thinking and systems thinking. And this is what the OKRs helps cultivate in a beautiful way, not theoretically and not just from a psychological, but from an actual structural perspective, right? We can bring in this enterprise thinking by having everyone look at the enterprise collectively. So, I want to put forth some operating principles, not necessarily like hardcore laws or rules, but these are, again, the mindset I took for this brief time that we have together is like, let's look at what gets in the way and how can we begin to sort of proactively address it, right? So one that'll help the implementation of OKR stick is that this notion is it does start at the top. And at the top, meaning that, you want your leadership team to be aligned on what the key, well, what the top objectives are. I say 3, might be 4, 5, 6, right? Asta knows as well, right? We start getting into the 8, 12, 15 territory, and we're no longer in OKR territory. We're just in the familiar old world of just setting goals. OKRs definitionally create a constraint, and the constraint pushes it so that we can force ourselves to consider what is the most valuable, necessary, critical, and timely. And how does it line up with each other so we're not creating drift, drag, and friction within the OKRs themselves? And so it starts at the top because we want the executive team to be the first one that's aligned. The second is that it's really, really powerful to have it be team authored and not just dictated from on high. And the reason for that is that, once the sort of top level objectives have been aligned, there's a rich conversation to be had within the teams about how do we bring our part to bear here. And so the what's the expression? People protect what they build, I think is the expression. And so when we have it be team authored, now we're starting to look at ownership, and we start looking back at accountability, and there's real value and magic in that. The fourth one is that, and this is I think I say the same thing about meditation. You're like, wait, where did he come from meditation suddenly? I've been, meditation is sort of my primary medicine. I've been meditating for 40 years now, and I put on meditation retreats, and I talk to folks in the retreat, and I say, you know, consistency is more valuable than intensity, right? And this is not all that different. The intensity of like we meet twice a year, and we meet for 3 days, and we bang it all out is not going to yield you as much value as the consistency of the cadence. And so the OKR, the quarterly meetings, the weekly check-ins, having a dialed in document is not nearly as valuable as having this ongoing conversation, right? And that's what the cadence gives you, is conversation. And the fourth one I'd have you consider is that um, uh, you know, low achievement is data. The problem with uh, if you say that hitting 60% of the objectives is problematic, if you have a culture where it says 67% you've failed, um, what you're going to get is people setting safe OKRs, right? We're going to sort of bring it down to the level of expectation rather than bring it up to the level of ambition. And so you've got to sort of walk that line very carefully. We want to accomplish them, but be careful that you're not making this more about failure and make it more about data. What's possible? What didn't we think through? Where did we have drift, drag, and friction? Where did it go off the rails, as it were? So I'll sort of leave you with this here towards the end. The This was a MIT Sloan management review from 2018. I looked to see if it was updated. It was quoted again in an HBR article in 2026, so it still holds in terms of less than 1 in 3 leaders can name 3 of their company's top priorities. It's a radical notion. It's a radical notion. If so few people can name what's going on, you understand what this number means, right? If people can't name it, this is drift at scale. Because if they can't name the priorities, it means they're taking the priorities wherever they want to go. And now you have all the ways that energy is leaking in the organization, just as I had sort of explained a moment ago. So putting this all together in just one quick thought, right? If you have awareness, but you don't take action, what you have is unrealized potential. On the other hand, if you take action without awareness, you have a tremendous amount of noise. And so this combination is an invitation for this notion of, conscious leadership on the sort of outside, like who are you? How are you showing up? How are you leading and sort of tamping down the ego myopia and bringing up your wisdom, love, and power? The conscious conduct says, how are we going about this, right? How did the team move together? How do you share agreements? And OKR is the sort of the what that you do to tie these two together, right? It's the measurable pathways, it's objectives and key results. You can direct energy rather than leak it. You can find where either the system is faltering or where ego myopia is getting in the way. And you can have essentially a faster, more repeatable way to accomplish the great and honorable purpose that you are here for on a daily. So, question for you to contemplate. Then we have some time for some Q&A. If there are any questions, I'm happy to address them the best I can. But where is energy leaking in your organization? And really, seriously, is it a framework or a human problem? And you have some notions on how to answer that at your leisure. So thank you for letting me rant there for a while. Please, if you have
Good.
a question, a comment, pushback, it's pushback would
What
be at it. Yeah.
what a juicy nugget. There was so much in that, Eric. Thank you. And not only the nuts and bolts and best practice of OKRs themselves, but I really appreciate your grounding that in how are we as leaders thinking about our purpose in a team of people, because ultimately we can't do any of this work without our teams of people, both at home and around the world. So I just really appreciate that foundation that you built, as well as the very practical best practice related to OKRs. And particularly with the purpose pledge and the density of the technical language of the commitments that we've all signed up for, how do we bring that to our teams of people on the ground and make sense of it? So that's really where the OKRs come into play, is what is our unique expression as businesses and organizations in how we uniquely are going to operationalize our commitments to the pledge. So, yeah, thank you, Eric, so much. I'm curious if there's any questions, aha moments in the crowd, how you are experiencing this apply to your work with OKRs and the Purpose Pledge. Feel free to bring your voice directly into the chat, or type into the chat whatever you feel more comfortable with.
I have a question.
Please.
Carol.
Hi, thank you so much. This was super, super helpful. I just wanted to know, because I think with new businesses, especially, I'm starting a new consciously led business. And I find that with my new partners, we became partners because we were both really, well, the three of us were very passionate. So I brought two partners in. And I think in the momentum of trying to lift the business off, I feel like I don't want to slow things down by then. I know this is important, obviously, but I feel like there's also importance to like getting something done so that we can start the runway, right? So I'm just finding it challenging because I'm hearing everything that you're saying, and there's things that I need to address and boundaries I need to set. And I almost don't want to tip it too much just yet, because I think it's important to just like at least try to go and get something done before we get into the nitty gritty of like these things. I know it doesn't make sense because you're just teaching us right now
No, 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 no,
how
no, no, no.
important it is, but you
Yeah,
know what I mean?
yeah.
Like, go
Yeah,
ahead.
so first of all, congratulations on starting something new, and kudos to you for having the courage and sort of willingness to dive in and do something like that. So hooray for that. Your point is significant because we have to look at sort of, maturity stages of an organization, right? And you're describing pre-startup, you're nascent, right? You have just sort of been born, and there are different things that we expect from a newborn than we expect from a 6-year-old or an 18-year-old or a 40-year-old, right? And so the question I think for you, or the sort of the contemplation for you, is what level of discipline do you want to intentionality? You talk about a conscious business, and oftentimes we think of conscious business as relegated to the purpose or the sort of the benevolence that we're bringing to the world because we're being intentional about it. A business at the end of the day is still a structure, it's a system that moves energy. And so the sort of the question that I would pose to you is, what level of intentionality do you want to bring right up at the front to sort of frame and host and framework the way energy moves through your organization? OKRs is one beautiful, response to it. For a nascent organization just off the ground, it's a little ambitious to pull off, right? However, if you just take the very first notion and begin to think in outcomes, not just in activities, you will already have made a significant change in the way your business is being run. So you can do that least bit. But yes, you're going to spend most of your time just surviving.
Okay, thank you. That's super helpful. That takes a load off. And that, yeah, it gives me a even clearer direction. I appreciate it.
Yeah, yeah, my pleasure. What else is up?
I'm seeing a good question in the chat from Kelsey Davis about what tool or software platform is the best for organizing team OKRs. Eric, I can chime in unless you want to take this
Oh,
one.
please, because I can't, I don't think there's a great one out there, but Asta, you've banged around this, yeah.
Yeah, well, when Dr. Bronner's first adopted the OKR framework, we fell into the trap of everything's a priority. And so it was hard to keep track of anything as a priority. And what that looked like was very long spreadsheets full of multiple layers of OKRs. And as we matured in our OKR practice, we really worked to refine to only 3 to 4 top objectives max so that we could truly focus. We did trial using Asana as an OKR tracking tool, and any platform, my point of view, is only as good as the team is willing to use it. And our team just didn't have a high level of adoption of OKR tracking in Asana. And what I found to be effective most recently is actually a paper written report. So once a quarter, I send off our OKRs to the teams that are leading that work and have them update with their latest status. So that has been our most recent effective tool. Although I am beginning to see the need to track more than quarterly, because if our teams are only making decisions on these things once a quarter, that only gives us 4 times a year to act. So I really take an attitude of continuous improvement around all of this and would love to stay in conversation with each of you if you find a tool that works well. I heard that Microsoft had one that they actually adopted, but that is unfortunately going by the wayside now and sounds like it's about to be sunset. So let's keep this conversation open and see how we all evolve over time and can learn from one another.
Yeah. Putting it into Asana turns it into a project management process, and that's problematic because it's not intended to be at the project. The project management level is below the OKRs, right? So we have the OKRs as sort of a guidance, direction, orientation, alignment, and then you have a host of projects will come out of it. Once you stick OKRs into the project management, you've sort of sucked the spirit out of it, right? And you turn it into sort of a bludgeon with which you're beating each other up. That's not the intent. Um, Unfortunately, yes, there is not a great software out there. I will tell you that, and maybe smart folks in here can figure it out. AI is a goddamn game changer in every dimension. Um, I haven't played with this yet, but I can imagine feeding some data into a custom, bot can go a long way to helping you with OKRs. We're sort of 2 minutes up. If there's more questions, I'd love to answer them, but it would have to be offline here because I know that Alyssa wants to take this back, wrap it up, and honor all you good people. Hey, thank you for inviting me on here. Thank you for letting me rant. Thank you for all of you for sort of holding the front line on insisting that business does not have to be a bunch of people sucking the marrow out of the planet and out of humanity. And that in fact we can and do and demonstrably able to run a business that's both profitable and conscionable, right? And my perspective, I'll say real quick, just in terms of conscious leadership, we're at this remarkable inflection point where you're seeing that, the world has long tilted away from being led by religion and government, right? It's not the kings and the priests or the queens and the shamans. It's business people running the show. And if we don't increase sort of consciousness among those folks pronto, we're seeing the damage, right? So hooray for all of us here who are putting our life on the line to raise consciousness in business, because it's not really a nice to have, it's a must have at this point. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Eric, and thank you so much, Asta, and joining us from your place of wisdom as an advisor to Purpose Pledge and at Bronner's. We're so delighted. We've had a really lovely mix today of Purpose Pledge companies and commitment catalysts and broader partners. You'll see these Lunch with Purpose sessions are candid, community-driven conversations with leaders, founders, operators, thought leaders like Eric on what it really takes to embed purpose in company governance, operations, and supply chains. So we welcome your feedback and suggestions about upcoming topics. Watch our website and our newsletter for upcoming sessions. Today's recording will be posted on our website. I'm going to drop the direct link in the chat, but purposepledge.org. And then we have a dedicated Lunch with Purpose page, which has an archive of recordings from these conversations. So thank you all, those within the Purpose Pledge community and our broader community of allies, for joining our conversation today. And thank you so much, Eric, for this crafting of the connection between conscious leadership and conscious conduct, and how OKRs can be this great operating system for getting there, and Asta for helping guide our conversation. So thank you, everybody, and we'll be talking to you soon.